A family's Christmas celebration turned deadly when 3 women died after eating a traditional holiday cake that was laced with arsenic. What initially seemed like a tragic accident quickly took a much darker turn, revealing a web of family tension, alleged secret poisonings, and a shocking suspect. But as investigators wrapped up their case, a chilling discovery now brings this investigation to an unexpected halt. I'm going to be speaking with a Brazilian criminal defense attorney to break down all of the details in this shocking case from abroad. Welcome to Sidebar, presented by Law&Crime. I'm Jesse Weber. Now, if you've been following us here on Sidebar, we have been all over this story out of southern Brazil. I mean, it is just crazy. December 23rd in the quiet town of Torre, a family came together to celebrate Christmas, and it was meant to be a joyous occasion. But everything spiraled out of control because of a homemade Brazilian cake. It is called Bolo de Natal. It was apparently prepared by 61-year-old Zeli Silva de Anos, the matriarch of this family, and what should have been a time for tradition and togetherness and happiness, it quickly turned into a nightmare because it turns out that this holiday staple, a fruitcake-like dessert filled with dried fruits and nuts soaked in liquor, apparently had something else in it: arsenic, poison. According to Brazilian police, several family members noticed this unusual spicy or unpleasant flavor when they started eating the cake. And when Zeli, who apparently made the cake, tried some of it, she told everyone else to stop eating it, but it was too late. Soon after, 3 family members, 58-year-old Maida Berenice Flores de Silva, 65-year-old Nusa Silva dos Anjos, and Nusa's daughter, 43-year-old Tatiana dos Anjos, they began feeling violently ill. They were rushed to the hospital. Their conditions got worse rapidly, and by the evening, according to the Daily Mail, Maida and Tatiana, they had suffered fatal heart attacks, and Nusa reportedly died of shock on Christmas Eve. Now, Zeli was rushed to intensive care, where she would fight for her life for several days. Ultimately, she survived this ordeal. She was released from the hospital in January, according to Brazilian police, but again, she lost her sisters and her niece. And as this family tried to process these devastating losses, the investigation began by Brazilian authorities. And it didn't take long for them to make a shocking discovery: dangerously high concentrations of arsenic in the cake and in the bodies of the deceased. And this wasn't just food poisoning. This was just poisoning, plain and simple. The investigation soon pointed to their target, Deise Moura dos Anjos, Zeli's daughter-in-law, as the primary suspect. She was temporarily arrested on suspicion of 3 homicide charges, 3 attempted homicide charges, but unfortunately, the sense of justice in this case was short-lived because on February 13th, she was discovered dead in her prison cell, with authorities suspecting a suicide by hanging. And get this, at the time of her death, police were reportedly actively investigating her for her alleged involvement in the poisoning of her father-in-law, who apparently died several months before this. His body was exhumed to do further examination, and apparently there were also high levels of arsenic found in his body. Now, we previously spoke with medical examiner Mary Jambelic about the symptoms you would expect to see with arsenic poisoning. Take a listen.
It affects the GI system, the lining of the GI system. So there's vomiting, watery diarrhea right away. There can be abdominal cramping, muscle cramping, as well as tingling and numbness in the nerves. As that progresses, you get shock and heart failure. So the fact that you mentioned 2 of the victims were listed as dying from a heart attack makes perfect sense, because you get a kind of rapid dehydration with the arsenic. You lose the water inside your blood vessels. It goes into other parts of your body, and you have heart failure, electrical disturbance. The doctors at the hospital can also look at other blood tests if they suspect arsenic. So they can look at your blood cells by drawing a little bit of blood and looking at it under a microscope, and they can see certain details in the red blood cells that might point to arsenic poisoning. Also, it affects your blood cells, so you lose your white blood cells, your red blood cells, your platelets, and that would show up on lab tests at the hospital as well. After someone survives an arsenic poisoning, you can get changes in your nails, in your fingernails, where it stops the growth plate, and they're called Mies lines. And you can see white lines across the fingernails of arsenic poison victims.
What a story, right? And look, the stories that we cover here on Sidebar, I feel just highlight how scary the world can be at times and how important it is to protect yourself. Talking about that, that is particularly true online, especially when it comes to protecting your personal information, whether it's spam, identity theft, online stalking. Our amazing sponsor, Surfshark, offers an incredible solution to these issues with their alternative number feature. So this service, built right into the Surfshark app, lets you create an entirely new identity. It is complete with a random US phone number, email, name. This way you can keep your real number and details completely private. It is great for signing up for services or websites that maybe you don't fully trust, and it ensures that your personal phone number stays free from spam. And also, with an alternative number, you don't have to give your real phone number to strangers while shopping on various marketplaces. So if you're ready to take your online privacy to that next level, then check out Surfshark in the description below or visit surfshark.com/alt-sidebar. Sign up now, get Surfshark's alternative number feature, plus 4 extra months of Surfshark. Now, according to the civil police investigation, 7 people were present at the gathering on December 23rd. Of those, only 6 ate the cake. Among those who consumed it, it was Zelly, her 2 sisters, Maida and Nuza's daughter, Tatiana, her 10-year-old grandson. Now, he was taken to the hospital, eventually discharged following the poisoning. But Zelly, the woman who baked the cake, ate apparently only 2 slices, and she was the only person to survive. According to AOL, she actually had the highest levels of arsenic in her blood. Again, she was rushed to the hospital, spent several days in intensive care, but then she was removed to a different ward. And then there was another surviving family member, Anuza's husband, and just think about the loss that he's endured through all this. Now, a lot of moving parts here. I want to talk about this, but I actually have a special guest to help break it down. So we are joined right now by Adrielli Barca, a criminal defense attorney in Brazil. Thank you so much for coming on. And once again, I'm going to have to ask you, did I say your name correctly? The pronunciation's not my strong suit.
Yes, Jesse, thank you. Thank you for the invitation.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. And first, just your general thoughts on this story. And for those who aren't from Brazil, this is a popular cake, right? People serve this to their family during the holiday time. I mean, if you could talk to us about the cake and just what you've been hearing about this case, because it's obviously made waves across the world.
It's an insane case. The worst part of this, she put the arsenic in there. She poisoned her father-in-law. She poisoned her whole family, and she was that serious that she wasn't going to get caught. She managed to not get any report on the father-in-law because she was sure that it was the bananas. She made everybody sure that it was the bananas that were poisoned.
Let's talk about that, because there's a lot of different people involved in here. But let's first start with the cake itself. So first of all, just so I know, this is a traditional cake that's served. It's a very popular cake?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. And do you know how police started to suspect foul play here? Because I've seen reports that it might have stemmed from the funeral, that she attended the funeral, and people at the funeral were saying, you know, you didn't even like the victims in this case, and that's when investigators started to look at this. I mean, I'm still a little bit confused, and maybe you have more information about how they were able to tie it to Deise.
Between everybody that was involved, she was the only one who had recent fights within members of the family, especially her mother-in-law. Everybody knows that she had fights with her mother-in-law for years, because even in her suicide note, she said that she thanked her mother-in-law for making her marriage a living hell. So she was the only one who apparently had any reason for that.
Let me ask you this. What charges was she going to be facing? Was she already charged? How does it work in Brazil in terms of, like, you know, here in the United States and a lot of our states, including New York, you have to be indicted by a grand jury in order to officially move the case forward. Was she charged? What was she going to be charged with? Do you know?
She wasn't officially indicted yet. She was in temporary arrest just for the sake of the investigation, but she wasn't indicted until she died. So now she can't be indicted, of course. But she was going to be indicted with triple homicide, triple qualified homicide and triple homicide attempt.
And what would the process have looked like? How long till she would be charged? How long till she would go to trial? And what does a trial look like in Brazil?
In crimes that involve homicide and other life type, it's usually a jury that was going to make her sentence. It takes about, since she was going to be arrested for the whole time, I think it was going to be about 6 months until she was tried, at least.
But she was being investigated, at least with respect to the death of her father-in-law. Did you anticipate that she could have been charged with his death as well?
Yes. Yes, she was going to, because the police report discovered that she was poisoned with arsenic too. That was her modus operandi. It was going to happen that way.
Interesting. So let's talk about it. Let's talk about the evidence that apparently linked Deise to the crime. Investigators say it was shocking. It was irrefutable. I'm going to break down some of this a little further. So according to reporting from the outlet Globo, investigators revealed that arsenic had been present in the flour used to bake the cake. So the General Institute of Expertise, or IGP, in Rio Grande do Sul did an analysis, and they found that the flour contained arsenic concentrations 2,700 times higher than what was in the cake itself. Using X-ray fluorescence equipment, experts traced the arsenic contamination to the flour. Lara Regina Sokol Gris, head of the Forensic Chemistry Division at the IGP, explained that the arsenic in the flour was so much higher than what was found in the cake, confirming that it was the flour as the source of the contamination. And she said that, and this is translated from Portuguese, but reportedly said, "We tested the cake itself with this equipment. It was already very positive, so to speak, for the cake. And for the flour, it was a much higher concentration. Further forensic analysis revealed arsenic traces in the victim's blood, the victim's bodies, in their stomachs, blood, and urine. Notably, according to investigators, Tatiana dos Anjos had the highest concentration of arsenic in her stomach, 384,000 micrograms per liter, 11,000 times the amount considered accidental." Margaret Mittman, director of the IGP, declared that the evidence was irrefutable, saying, and again this is translated to English, "It is unquestionable that arsenic was in the cake, and it is unquestionable that the source in the cake recipe is the flour." Adrielli, thoughts on this kind of evidence, and how would a defense attorney defend against it? Would it be saying, how can you prove that it was Deise who actually was responsible for the flour? So your thoughts on this evidence?
Well, first of all, it wasn't just the arsenic that they found. They found receipts of her purchases of the arsenic. They found internet researches of how to poison somebody, how to kill somebody by poison, what kind of poison wouldn't be found in somebody's blood. And that was all from her phone that was seized in January.
So let's talk about the why, right? Why would she have allegedly done this? Well, as police investigated, they discovered that the motive behind this poisoning apparently stemmed from this long-standing feud between Deise and her mother-in-law, Zeli. So the two women had reportedly been at odds for years, with tensions escalating after Deise married Zeli's son. Family members told CNN Brazil that their conflict intensified over time, with a particularly heated argument over a wedding ceremony. It was followed by a financial dispute involving several $100s that was apparently withdrawn from the couple's joint checking account. According to the Daily Mail and Globo, the civil police investigators say that in November of last year, just over a month before the deadly Christmas gathering, as you were saying, Deise had apparently searched for terms like arsenic poison, heart poison, poison for humans on her phone. And this unsettling behavior during the investigation, it raised further suspicions, especially when police learned that she had actually purchased arsenic on 4 separate occasions leading up to these deaths. And the investigation also revealed that Deise had allegedly poisoned, as we've been talking about, her father-in-law, Paolo Luis dos Anjos, who, according to the Mirror, died from an intestinal infection in September of 2024 after eating bananas and powdered milk delivered by Deise. But post-mortem tests done after his body was exhumed earlier that month confirmed that he had ingested arsenic. And even more disturbing was the revelation that she had also allegedly poisoned her own husband and maybe accidentally her son too. This is according to outlets like Newsbreak and the Brazilian outlet Band. Both reportedly, by the way, fell ill around the same time as the victims, but survived. And the arsenic traces, they were found in their bodies. But investigators are, ongoing to determine whether other unexplained deaths, such as that of Daise's father in 2020, were also linked to her actions. And as we mentioned, she was arrested on January 6th, according to the BBC, despite her calm and cool demeanor during questioning. Forensic evidence pointed directly to her involvement in the deaths. A police report, now exceeding 1,000 pages, details her role in a series of poisonings, culminating in the Christmas cake tragedy. Adrielli, I want to go back to you on this. So talk to me about how strong you think this evidence is. I mean, what would have been a defense for her at trial?
My first thought on this is that even if everything was found on her phone, it could be done by somebody else who had access to her phone. She denied all of the allegations. She denied that she had any involvement, even in her notes. She mentions the fights that she had with her husband's family, but she doesn't mention that she would do anything like that. She says, one more time, you're the victim, I'm the bad guy. But the first thing that I would use in this case is the fact that even though it was made from her phone, it could be made by somebody else using her phone, even her husband, even her son, if that's the case.
What about the purchases of the arsenic, the alleged 4 purchases of arsenic?
Yeah, about the purchases. It's not answered at how she was able to buy all of that arsenic without getting flagged by the mail. And if the arsenic that was bought was actually poison, that's possible too. Brazil has a few platforms where you're able to buy anything, just anything and everything without regulation. For example, we have Mercado Livre, we have OLX. Those platforms, they have their own systems of delivery, but it happens all the time that people buy substances from that platforms, and they're not exactly what they thought they bought.
Oh, that's interesting. That's interesting. Oh, okay, that might have been an avenue for defense. Let me ask you, by the way, in Brazilian law, are you innocent until proven guilty?
Yes.
Okay. So look, I mean, these are a lot of allegations. We're talking about a lot of investigations. Nothing was proved definitively. Does the investigation continue into the deaths of not only the individuals at this Christmas gathering, but also into the death of her father-in-law, into the attacks, the alleged poisoning of her husband and son? Even though she is dead, do those investigations continue, and where do they go?
Yeah, those investigations are already done. They were done last week, actually. The police report was already concluded with all of the information. Even though she died, the investigation continues for the sake of finding out what happened to the family. Even though she can't be indicted, the investigation had to be concluded anyways.
And in other words, do police at this point think that she is responsible for everything?
Yes, positive.
So let me talk about what happened on February 13th. So Daisy was found dead in her jail cell, reportedly left behind a note. According to Globo, authorities confirmed that there were writings in her cell, which is now part of the investigation. And in one excerpt from a note, she had wrote seemingly to Zelly, her mother-in-law, and this is what it was reported. Thank you very much for these 20 years that you made my married life hell. Once again, I am the villain and you are the heroine. She had been incarcerated since her arrest, had recently been transferred to another prison, reportedly due to some kind of security concerns. And the day before she died, Brazilian outlets report that her husband said he was filing for divorce. So while the cause of her death is being treated as a suicide, or the manner of death, this investigation remains ongoing. At least that's my understanding. Adrielli, right? They're still,
Yes.
are they still trying to figure out exactly what happened here?
No, the investigation is already concluded for now, about the cake, but about her death, I don't think there's going to be much of an investigation at this point because the police already thinks that she killed herself, that it was due to suicide.
What do you think of that note?
I think that she was trying to assume herself of guilt and say that she was framed for everything.
So Sabrina Defenti, who's a deputy, told Globo that they believe she had some sort of serious mental illness. Quote, the only conclusion we have reached is that she had a serious mental disorder. Financial motive was even considered, but when we found that they tried to kill her husband and son, the financial motivation was discarded. What is a mental health defense that might have applied here?
She wasn't submitted to examination. These are just assumptions that she might have done this because she was mentally ill, but she wasn't submitted to any type of investigation through her medical health.
But if she was examined, we have in the United States, we have the insanity defense, which is very tough to prove. Is there something similar or something less
Yes.
in Brazil? How does it work?
Yes, we have that possibility, but the difference between the insanity allegation is that when you have a prison sentence, the prison sentence usually has a deadline about after a few years. It's easier for the person to get a parole. She can get out of prison in a few years, even though it was a serious crime. About a third of the penalty, if she was in there, she could get out. When you have an insanity allegation, you can't do that because you can't prove that you're better after a few years.
By the way, for the charges that she could have been facing, murder charges, is there a death penalty in Brazil?
No.
No. So she would be looking at life in prison.
She would be looking at maximum 30 years.
30 years. Wow. No life in prison.
Yes. No.
Oh, interesting.
You could be sentenced to more than 30 years, but you cannot be in prison for more than 30 years in Brazil.
Oh, interesting. Wow. By the way, this jail where she was being housed, the jail where she died, I don't know how familiar you are with it, but does this kind of thing happen where it was an all-women's facility, I believe. Does this kind of thing happen where inmates, end up dead like this, end up killing themselves? Is that common? Is that a problem across different jail units in Brazil?
All the time.
All the time. Why does that happen? Is there a lack of security? They don't have the resources? Yes. Why does that happen?
Yes. In these cases, here's what happens. She was in temporary arrest, so she was in a prison where she was surrounded by people who were in the same conditions. It was fewer people where she was, but she was transferred on January 31 because her temporary prison was changed to a preventive custody. Temporary, you could be temporarily in prison for 30 days. After that, the judge has to analyze if you're going to be arrested in preventive custody for at least 90 days, or if they're going to put you on the streets. In that case, she was transferred to a bigger prison. And when you're in a bigger prison, Brazil has prisons that are overcrowded, very overcrowded. So she had to be isolated due to her case being very in the media. So there probably wasn't enough security around her. The workers in there have cells that they have to take care of with 10, 15 other prisoners. And she was alone in a prison cell, so I don't think they thought that they had to worry about her.
Yeah, it's quite an end to what is a very, very disturbing, bizarre case. It's a tragedy. It's a family tragedy. And even though with her death, as we were saying, a part of this investigation is over, and police feel confident as to what happened, there's still so many questions I think we all have as to what really went down here and why everything went down the way it did. Adrielli Barca, thank you so much for taking the time. Really appreciate you coming on here and breaking it down for us, because we are not familiar with Brazilian law and the Brazilian criminal justice system. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
That's all we have for you right now here on Sidebar. Everybody, thank you so much for joining us. And as always, please subscribe on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Jesse Weber. I'll speak to you next time.